I think that soon we are back. I hope everyone can hear me in the Zoom room. I think that technology exceeded our expectations, so to speak, with its specific nitty-gritty. So I'm guessing we have Andy and Maria here, like really on the screen. So I will let myself just introduce both of you, and of course, then the floor is yours. Right, so Andy Best and Maria Pustinen are artists with international careers encompassing sculpture, performance, media, net, and bioart. Maria Pustinen is an artist, cultural commentator, producer, and researcher. She's a PhD candidate at the Academy of Fine Arts, University of the Arts, Helsinki. And Andy Best is an experienced curator, producer, an educator, and is professor of sculpture at the Academy of Fine Arts, University of the Arts, Helsinki, and a PhD candidate in the Department of Media at Aalto University, School of Arts, Design and Architecture. Andy and Maria were amongst the world's first online artists, and during the 1990s created beautiful, provocative, multi-user 3D worlds on the internet. They developed a web-based 3D multi-user community platform, as well as virtual pet and e-learning applications for mobile phones. Now they focus on developing playful, physically engaging installations and public artworks. They have founded Espo Kunsthalle, an initiative to bring critically engaged art to suburban areas, and the Imagining Godzilla artistic residency network platform, using artistic methods to investigate the environmental changes facing the Baltic Sea. Okay, so I mean, this is super exciting. And I mean, I must say that, we've been really, really hoping and looking forward to having the two of you here with us. So we are most honored. And I'm just passing the baton to you. So I know that we are starting with a film. So I will just try to do my, technical nitty-gritty if I can.
Okay, thank you very much, Marietta, for the introduction and for inviting us. And it's great to be with you. And even though we can't see the audience, we can hear some chuckles from them. So that's nice to know that there's some life on the other end of the camera.
There is.
Yeah, good. And apologies that we couldn't be, in person there with Godzilla, but we will tell a bit more about that perhaps at the end of the talk. But as you said, we want to start with a short video. And please note that the video was made about a year ago when I was still working at Aalto. And so it shows there my sort of Aalto credentials rather than my Academy of Fine Arts credentials. As you can see, I'm now sitting in the yard at the new building here. So
absolutely.
Yeah, welcome to that. Anyway, maybe I try to share and play the video because it makes a good introduction to them.
And it's also sort of good to remind that video is actually being done by some sort of Aalto sort of should I say almost like advertising of the stuff what's been doing. So it's fairly sexy and speedy stuff that was shown in Ars Electronica as far as I remember. That was the actual main sort of distribution platform for it. And but let's go for it. Thank you very much again for inviting us. Pleasure to be here with you.
Honored.
Huge areas of blue algae in the middle of the sea. People don't realize that out at sea there are these massive areas where you just sail through for hours, and it's just horrific. Welcome to Godzilla. Godzilla is a 42-foot Warram Pahi catamaran. We have owned Godzilla for about 15 years and have been sailing a lot around the Baltic Sea. And during that time, we've seen the effects of the pollution in the environment. We started thinking, like, what could we do about it? And having this sort of boat, we realized that this could become a platform for sort of multitude of artists and researchers to use for their own projects. Well, our hope is to create a network around the Baltic Sea. That means a network with sort of artist residency centers and scientific research centers where the boat can visit, and while the boat is in these various places, both local and international artists will come and do projects. But also because Godzilla is quite eye-catching, it's like unusual, we hope to use that as a way to attract the maybe boating public and or other public to the works so that it can become a sort of dissemination platform. We chose the name Godzilla for the boat because she appeared, at least in the Finnish context, as like this sort of monster. And I've always thought that Godzilla is like a friendly monster. You could maybe imagine some of these industries as these monsters, these threats to the sea. I think the very unique nature of Godzilla means that when you're on the boat, you have a different type of relationship with the sea. So my name is Andy Best. I'm a lecturer in sculpture in the transdisciplinary art studies part of Aalto University.
Okay, and now I'm going to share my screen again to put the PowerPoint there. Okay, Maria, are you coming back?
I'm here all the time.
Okay, so yeah, so I think the video gives a very clear introduction to the boat and our idea. So rather than being any virtual network, we're really developing this as a physical network, and we have a physical platform, which is the boat. As you can see, there's a lot of space on the deck, and the nature of a sailing catamaran is that it's very stable, but we can also get in very close to the land, explore these marginal areas, really these marine fringes that Marietta was referring to. And the boat also is very eye-catching and unusual, at least in the Baltic context.
Andy, I have to sort of add, just to sort of keep you guys sort of awake, that is also this, the type of the boat is known being quite special and characterized by the designer, James Warren, who used to, he basically wanted to design a boat that would be very safe and steady for cross-Atlantic cruising and for particularly ocean cruising. Therefore, it's like there's lots of ropes that are binding these big beams together to the hulls. But the idea is that this is also sort of, should I say, a kind of outcome of the hippie ideas landing in Britain, so that the, James Warren is known for sailing, crossing Atlantic with 6 women who were all his girlfriends. And usually in the boatyard, they were sort of building these boats all naked. And how Andy's then relating to that, he could sort of actually tell that. But as a sort of fun thing, which is very dear to me, when me and Andy had the first real date, before we had any so-called, let's say, physical contact, he laid the sort of drawings of the boat he wanted to build, and that was a bit smaller catamaran. So this thing, when we've been together for about 30 years, it somehow builds up very tightly to our own personal life and experience. And to me, it's also about the sort of cultural crossing and transformation of the relationship. Was I too straightforward?
No, it's fine. Some of what you have said is correct and some not. So anyway, as I was saying in the video, and as I suppose many of you know, the Baltic Sea does have these huge areas of algae out in the middle. It really is very eye-opening to sail through like huge areas of this for hours, and because they're away from the coastline, they really don't attract the same attention as a little bit of algae around the archipelagos where it affects people's like summer houses. So a few facts about the Baltic Sea, and I hope I'm not boring you, but these are also some of the reasons why the sea is so affected. It's a big inland sea, and yet the catchment area, so the area of land which drains into the sea, is 4 times larger than the sea itself. Many of the major rivers are, of course, coming through heavily industrialized areas. And because there is a lot of commercial and leisure shipping, and particularly, I would say, these giant cruise ships that we see off the coast of Finland, Sweden. We were visiting Visby in Gotland at the end of August, and there were still all the time these, they call Mein Schiff, these huge German cruise ships coming into Visby. And my understanding is that particularly these cruise ships are refusing to take the services of the harbors, and still are dumping a lot of pollution directly into the sea, because of course it's financially beneficial for them. Of course, there have been a lot of agreements, particularly the Helsinki Commission, there's HELCOM in 2007, where with the aim to change the sea, to try to enforce new restrictions on various types of pollution, and to provide support for the various Baltic states to improve the cleaning of the pollution into the sea. But as we can see, things have been quite slow. I think one of the major forms of progress has been in St. Petersburg and in Russia with the development of new water treatment systems there. But particularly, I think in the, you could say, western part of the Baltic, so Finland, Sweden, Denmark, possibly Germany, the farmers, the agricultural industry is particularly slow to adopt more progressive means of reducing the amount of phosphates that are draining into the sea.
If I added something to that, for example, at the moment, the Finnish government is having a sort of internal fight where the Green Party minister from the Green Party, who is in charge of the environmental issues, she is echoing the EU sort of wish that the agriculture should also be given a sort of 29% demand to cut fossil and the sort of cut the pollution, so that the agricultural industry also in Finland should adopt to the sort of measures to cut. And the agricultural party, the central party in Finland that is holding the, that is looking for the farmers' interest, just refuses to accept any quota. And this is unfortunately been an ongoing situation now for about 40 years. This is at least the Finnish sort of a situation. And the Finnish farming industry is, of course, affecting the Finnish archipelago a lot. And I sort of wanted to maybe add to Andy's presentation there. If you examine the satellite images of the Baltic Sea, you can clearly see that the worst blue algae flocks are indeed in the sort of open sea area, somewhere from the North Visby to the Åland and South Visby, South Gotland towards like Germany. Those are the areas where it's really the worst. And it's the similar kind of phenomena what's happening in the oceans, where the plastic waste that is dumped into the oceans, that is like sort of all collected into the middle as a pool. And it's like in the middle of the summer, when there's like quite still waters, the green algae organizes itself into spiral form. And some of the Finnish sort of politicians are commenting these satellite images as, oh, how fantastically beautiful the nature indeed can be. And there's this sort of weird misconception about what the beauty does consist of. Yes, please. Andy, go on.
Yeah, well, we better move on because I think time is gone. Yeah. Anyway, here we show our planned routes for exploring the Baltic with Godzilla. This year, as you can see, we have spent time in the Finnish archipelago, Åland, and then we've been in Gotland working with Baltic Art Center and Lena Lappalute, Lithuanian artist. But in future years, we plan other directions, as you can see, going to the south, to the east, and to the north. Yeah, and here is that. Just to now show you a few of the artists that we have been working with. In 2019, we were based in Helsinki with Bioart Society, and some of you might have already seen some of these presentations, but Till, a sound artist, Eva Makali, a performance artist, very nice Dada-esque underwater poem. As you can see, she needed to use rock to hold herself underwater so she could perform and then try to record the sounds. Tivon Royce, artist currently living in Washington State in the USA. He's doing a lot of work with photogrammetry, but for him, the sort of archipelago is quite different. Usually he's working with more sort of post-industrial spaces. But anyway, he uses the works together with an AI that is trained to develop sort of dystopian science fiction narratives around them.
Andy,
yeah,
I want to sort of mention about, if you put back the Tivon's image, just to sort of say that, as a funny coincidence, because we're very much interested in the geopolitical and historical issues dealing with Baltic Sea and the logistical routing and the military technologies. The Tivon's, we had to cancel one of the Tivon's sort of filming days, because the Putin and Trump met in Helsinki. They had a meeting in Helsinki, and all the drone flying was heavily sanctioned. So Timon was not able to fly the drone that particular day. And so it's quite interesting how the reality penetrates into the art in such a sort of a heavy duty ways. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and other people like Gary Markle, who's a fashion designer artist, had working with the Selkie myth. The Selkie is a creature that is a seal that can sort of turn into a human. And he created this suit from waste found on the beaches around the islands. Pekka Niskanen and Mohammed Sulaiman Labat doing a very interesting and long-term project about the connection between phosphate mining in West Sahara and then how that same phosphate is used as fertilizer in the Baltic, and how that is the main contributor to the environmental problems. And this phosphate mining is basically illegal, even though it's supported by the EU and other Western countries. But because they need it so much, they refuse to do anything about the military occupation of those countries. Then Samir, whose work has been very much about a sort of media archaeology of networks and power, so literally electricity networks, data networks. And we, with him, tried to trace the various underwater cables around Helsinki. So in this summer, because it's been a little bit different, not with lots of artists, but we worked with Rag Elnug, who's a young performance artist. And then we traveled to Gotland to work with the Baltic Art Center and Lena Lapelute and her husband. And also, of course, we're participating here, and we happened to meet in Visby also with Jereminas and Nomada Urbanus and discussing about potential collaboration with them. So this is Rag. One of his performance roles is to become a merman, and he was swimming around Godzilla as a merman, which was quite nice. And here, I don't have the video, probably luckily for you, but he's playing the Pirates of the Caribbean theme as a merman, which was quite nice. And with Lena and Mantas, the original plan had been to sail out to a number of small islands around Gotland and allow them to collect audio recordings of the sea mammals like the seals, well, and also bird life. But the weather while we were there was so bad, so windy, that it was very, very difficult to get close enough to do these sort of things. In this picture, it looks fairly calm, but it's still very, very windy. But this was probably the only somewhat reasonable day when we were there. But they had a very good time, and this is part of the what is maybe evolving as the more functional use of the Godzilla project to allow artists time to be out at sea, very close to the elements, and to really understand what it means to be close to the sea and to experience that. We also visited to the Ornö Marine Research Station, and here you can see the researchers and some of the artists, as Maria and Mantas and some of the people from Baltic Art Center, discussing with them. It's very interesting work. They're doing long-term research into the fish qualities and all things to do with fish. So Maria, do you want to do the sort of conclusions?
Oh, about the previous, this R Center,
Well,
they were, by my mind, they were also trying to grow torsk, the cod, because cod used to be a sort of extremely, there were huge quantities of cod in previous years, and they're now trying to reintroduce cod back to Baltic Sea, so that it also has sort of economical they provide the economic potential there, and also they're trying to investigate what is wrong with the current Baltic Sea sea environment, sea bed, or the food chain that the cod does not seem to be able to survive. So on the basis of this summer's observations, our intake of the artists on Godzilla was very limited because of COVID, of course. That's why we didn't even do anything in the summer of 2020. And also this year we had to be very sort of conservative in how to proceed with it. So next year we want to bring more artists to the boat. But just as Andy said, we've been sort of sailing actually for about almost 25 years together in Baltic Sea. And we have observed following issues in the past few years, that firstly the summer weathers and they have been changing. The storms and the winds are more radical. They come faster, and they actually seem to turn more stormy, more heavy duty, so it's more dangerous to sail. And you have to be way more precautious, show more precautious than before. Then there's the stagnation of certain type of weather patterns. So the high and low pressures seem to stick on for weeks, which are leading to extreme drought, as we remember from this summer. Or there will be flooding, like in Germany, when we had extremely dry season in the summertime in Nordic countries. Then in Germany and south parts of Europe, they were flooding, like Holland as well. All the rain seemed to be landing to the central parts of Europe. But also in Finland, we've had record amounts of snow coming to the south coast of Finland, rather than being distributed more evenly in the country. There's less fish, less birds, less sounds. The seabed is mostly dead. Also, I remember myself that it was just horrifying in a sort of perfectly calm night, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. We were motoring from the Estonian islands, Hiidenmaa, to Finnish archipelago Åland, and there were tens of sea miles of blue algae, and one seal popped up his head from the sea and was almost like trying to cry for help next to our boat, because seals get lost in the cyanobacteria and they're not able to anymore navigate, because usually seals are calling for their comrades. They're sort of the friends and their pack from tens of miles, and that is making them their sort of navigation system deteriorate with the masses of the blue algae. The collapse of natural food chains. So this is not only limited to the Baltic Sea, but also in the west coast of the US and Canada. The salmon is losing its sort of a strength and is not able to have anymore, because they're lacking some part of the nutrition in the food chain. So by the time they would be migrating back to the rivers where they would like to hatch the eggs, they are too knackered and too weak that they don't have any more the stamina to rise up, and that is causing that is affecting the ecosystem, regional ecosystem as a whole. Because, for example, the bears in the west parts of Canada are, of course, dependent on the salmon rising into the rivers for their autumn food in order to be able to hibernate in the winter. So this is causing the whole ecosystem to suffer.
And of course, what then happens is that the bears go looking for food elsewhere, which means that they come into towns and villages.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like here, where the wolves are coming into closer to humans.
Yeah, to urban habitat. Overfishing of the breeding Baltic herring currently, this is apparently happening in Swedish coastline, that the overfishing is nowadays so sort of a common that they are running, they're trying to, they're bringing the nets to very close to the trawling nets to the close to the shore where the herring, Baltic herring, would come to hatch and lay the eggs. And this is of course causing problems for the future stock of the Baltic herring. So we're losing that as well. But the observation from the harbor life, what we're very sad to witness, that the people who come to the harbors with the motorboats or sailing boats, they are dumping their grey water, the waste, into the harbors. So in that sort of closed circuit of the piers in the harbors, there's radical green algae problem where people are then swimming in the piss and the grey water, bubbling water. And this, by my mind, something should also be done to educate and regulate how people behave with their wastewater in the guest harbors. Okay.
Okay. Well, Marietta is indicating we need to finish, and we are, I think, at the end. Thank you. And yeah, an image of that sort of well, maybe not so welcoming storm clouds approaching. So.
Thank you so much. And really big applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I mean, I didn't say that. I mean, like the speakers know about that, but I didn't say that to the audience. Of course, we will run three papers one after the other, or three interventions rather than papers one after the other, and then we'll try to have some time for a little Q&A at the end. So, in that sense, I would like to invite now Jesse Peterson, to whom I will pass the mic. Do you have the mic? Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so I will let myself introduce you, and we'll soon also kind of disappear from the vision. But we should probably first just upload the screen that we want to share, right?
Sure. Do the volume first.
Yeah, 1 second. I think that. One moment, technical things is always that one.
After she stops speaking, make it 2-second break so I can change.
Okay. Oops. Let me see. Right. Sorry for this. But yeah, maybe I will first introduce you and then do the sharing, or maybe I should do the sharing first to make sure that this is in. But why is it not popping up here? Yeah. Yeah. Probably this, right? Oops, sorry for this. Okay, but okay, you can see this, and I hope that the sound. Wait, I mean,
I was going to do an introduction.
Yeah. I mean, I just thought that maybe, this might make sense to actually. Is it okay? Yeah, but I mean, can you hear? Can people in the chat in the room hear us?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, so I think that we got lost with too many, too many sound controls. I'm afraid between the sharing of the phone.
Yeah.
I mean, can I redo this? I mean, can you all bear with me? So, I mean, I'm sorry, Jesse, about this. So, Jesse Peterson is a postdoctoral researcher at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Uppsala, Sweden. He researches how people ascribe value, meaning, and purpose to environmental phenomena. His work discusses marine pollution, conservation, digital technologies, and death, and has appeared in peer-reviewed journals, edited collections, literary magazines, and museum exhibits, such as Green Letters, The Discourses of Environmental Collapse, Geohumanities, Terrain.org, Saltfront, and more. He completed his PhD with a focus on environmental humanities in 2020 at KTH Royal Institute of Technology, and I think that, you can access it, open access, right, online. So please do, because I mean, it's a really amazing and exciting piece of work. So I'm passing my baton to you, Jesse, and I'm sorry for all the technical things. I will sit here and, change the microphones.
Yes. Okay. My talk is titled Seeking an Algal Perspective, Exploring Harmful Algae Through an Interview with Nodularia spumigena. As agricultural runoff, wastewater, and other forms of pollution have increased the number and range of microalgae in aquatic environments during the last century, harmful algae have become one kind of algal being. In the time of slime, anthropocentrism, and harmful algal research, feminist philosopher Astrid Schrader looks at environmental science on harmful algal blooms and points out that the human subject remains the only historical actor, while the microbes are assumed to continue to act as they have always done, existing in a fixed relationship to their environment, which they presumably cannot change. Rather than making this assumption, Schrader argues that society must consider algal histories and temporalities in order to grapple with questions such as to whom the ecological transformations of the oceans matter. Assuming that ecological transformations to the oceans matter to more than just people, the following question becomes possible. In what ways do the oceans matter to harmful microalgae? Taking seriously the need for exploring algal historicity in order to explicate different ways that maritime environments come to matter for humans and harmful microalgae, this chapter draws on recorded anecdotes, observations, and approximately 30 years of reporting in the Harmful Algae newsletter. Methodologically, I frame and augment my analysis of these records by employing multi-species arts of attentiveness, which encompasses getting to know another in their intimate particularity and learning to cultivate worlds of mutual flourishing. In addition, this analysis is presented using arts-based data analysis in the form of a dialogic interview. Performing my analysis in this way offers grounds for reflecting on the legitimacy of writing a non-human perspective in order to create a speculative fabulation materialized in fiction and scholarship, which becomes grounded in algal interests. Moreover, it highlights how the making of harmful algae represents unequal relational footings between algae and people and provides means for considering how to reconcile human lives to algal others rather than trying to make algae serve human interests. In sum, this method addresses the conundrum of trying to take on an algal perspective and using it as a lens for understanding algal harm. Luckily for me, algal blooms are quite common in the Baltic Sea, as we just saw, and a day excursion to the Stockholm's outer archipelago provided me opportunity to encounter some cyanobacteria and interview them. There I swam with the blooms, asked them about their past and what they thought about being labeled as harmful. And what I will now present is a record of that interaction. Question. Considering that we cannot actually have a literal conversation such as we're having, my readers might criticize this methodological and stylistic choice. They might question the ethical reasons behind giving you a voice, as well as what contributions to current discussions on algal blooms this choice might provide. They will want to know, why are we having this conversation, subverting academic genre conventions in the process, and how writing algae in this way offers new interpretations on human relations to algae.
These are important questions, but not some we spend much time thinking about. Certainly, many might leverage the argument that you are anthropomorphizing us and that doing so is problematic.
So assuming my characterization of you anthropomorphizes you, I think it does so by combining two forms of anthropomorphism, personification and projection. As a form of personification, your character performs a symbolic function rather than a scientific one. As a limited exercise in projection, I try to remain sensitive to the evolutionary, biological, and ecological context. In many respects, this approach to anthropomorphism cares less about how you respond to environmental stimuli in order to better understand your behavior, as it does in asking you to respond to social stimuli to learn about our relationship to each other. Students, for instance, learn a great deal by anthropomorphizing molecules in disease processes. Its use is even considered a strategy for making science more gender-neutral in science education. In this sense, the act or performance of anthropomorphism is the point, more so than any didactic explanation of it.
Well, consider also that making us speak in this way can challenge the assumptions people make about anthropomorphism. Although you have real constraints on what you can imagine and how you make us communicate, you could also leverage evolutionary, post-human, and material arguments to suggest that there's algal DNA in you. Perhaps you are just an anthropomorphized algal being, and in our encounter here on the shores of this island, we emerged together as storied beings. Many scholars working on animal and plant studies challenge such conceptual boundaries people place around themselves. Indeed, we'd like to point out that the concept of anthropomorphism itself may be merely part of a reductive anthropocentric logic intended to deny us agency and wonder. Instead of anthropomorphizing us, we see you participating in ecofeminist Val Plumwood's call for a radically intentionalizing anti-reduction writing of the world, in which you reinvest with speech, agency, and meaning the silenced ones. Instead of anthropomorphizing us, you are celebrating radical alterity, and in doing so, you're becoming less anthropocentric and perhaps less human, not to debase you or your species, but to celebrate you as animal, to step outside a modernist frame into other cosmological storytelling traditions. Though you may not ever fully understand our and other non-human subjective experiences of life, as philosopher Thomas Nagel has argued, we suggest that many of the attributes you assign to the anthropos might not be so unique, and rather, arguments that emplace the conceptual frame of anthropomorphism around our conversation reveals discomfort with stepping outside a human exceptionalist or anthropocentric perspective. In this sense, hopefully our character in this interview can contribute to making the human as well as the typical academic writing style strange.
Yet, I still think some readers will choose to stay with anthropomorphism rather than leave it behind as Plumwood suggests.
Certainly. Readers who harbor doubts about rejecting anthropomorphism as a human construct intended to tame and control non-human power might need further assurances. Nevertheless, we sympathize with your effort to go beyond the animal and give our name to your voice and mind, a move that tries to refrain from making us another. As a dialogic method, whether anthropomorphic or not, it gives you the opportunity to say something you haven't yet thought of, maybe even allows you to take on a virtuoso but doomed act of complete empathy and pull yourself into a zoomorphic realm. Additionally, it's one way to mobilize a think with frame and seek to understand us through our own bodily experience. It refuses the anthropocentric inclination to dichotomize humans with nature and opens up space to reconceptualize ethical and moral assumptions about the ways we ought to be treated. By trying to write a collective being, one doesn't have to be beholden to an unadulterated perspective or viewpoint. Whether the readers ought to understand the writing of my character as anthropomorphism, my voice as zoomorphizing your character, or as an exercise outside either of these anthropocentric conceptual frames will perhaps change the interpretation of this text.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
As regards your method, you are inevitably working in translations. You are making us speak based on sources you've read, so what we say is contingent and partial. And to acknowledge this reveals the fabrication of our character, and maybe yours, to your readers. In the imagination and translation, it is unlikely that you can work out the contradictions that will arise, and trying to reconcile them would be a disaster both empirically and stylistically. Which is to say, we are highlighting that all characters speak through their author, another literary device, especially when their languages are incommensurable. In this way, we are a fiction, and what we have to say is fictive, even though we symbolize something very real.
Well, let's move on to one of these real concerns. You and other algal species produce toxins, which is one of the ways by which my society deems you harmful. What does it feel like to be described in this way?
Well, the committed international effort to studying harmful algae did not materialize until the late 20th century. The International Oceanic Commission of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization began to programmatically address harmful algal events by seeking to connect managerial and scientific concerns. In 1993, the study group on the dynamics of algal blooms was recommended to be transformed into a working group on harmful algal blooms. And from previous international conferences, the plan to create a society started in motion. Suggestions for what to call the society were conservative, but in the hopes to find a catchy acronym, recipients of the harmful algae news were encouraged to suggest alternatives, acronyms like doom, death, apocalypse, saviors of society, etc.
What do you make of these suggestions?
To us, these playful acronyms make harmful algal blooms severely harmful, slayers of organisms and environments. It really puts us at odds with each other in the seas in which we thrive. Nevertheless, according to Harmful Algae News, the word harmful was preferred over toxic because it was more general. Doing so left open the possibility to study algal harm as a broader issue than just toxicity. To illustrate, algal blooms are not just harmful plant-like agglomerations weaving toxins. In addition to being poisonous, algae represent ontological and aesthetic concerns as pollutants, as literal waste, wrack, and detritus that litters the ocean. However, such language also marks a perceptual shift wherein blooms no longer feature as the primary research subject. These designations broaden the kinds of harms we could inflict.
In many ways, the question as to how algae became harmful seems to have been a result of this institutionalization of algal research focused on the damages inflicted upon human societies. It evidences an intensifying relationship between humans and algal blooms, but one directed exclusively at addressing these harms.
Assuredly, our entire brief relationship spanning several centuries describes only an overview of one way by which humans and algae have been drawn closer together. For example, it in no way describes how human activities have contributed to the global increase and spread of harmful algal blooms. Yet it articulates how increased interest, awareness, and monitoring efforts contribute to the making of hazardous times, places, and beings, individually or communally, as much as evolutionary or adaptive strategies undertaken by us and other algae. This change in hazard and harm can be understood as a move from the anecdotal to the quantitative. Harmful Algae News, in particular, illustrates a sustained level of interest at the international level in algal blooms and their toxicity. By consistently reporting on harmful algal blooms throughout the globe, it has helped to solidify the importance for studying and managing harmful algal blooms as a serious economic and ecological threat. The initial fear is that harmful algal blooms research might remain too localized, diluted, repetitive, or divisive does not seem to have fully materialized.
I think you've made clear that there's a lot of labor undertaken by persons to render you and other algae species harmful, but doesn't this distract us from the troubling actual harm that algal blooms can cause?
It can be difficult, but we need to remind one another that algal blooms also become harmful through perspectival concerns and material matters over with whom or what they interact. For example, humans haven't yet considered whether or not our participation or role in a dramatic flourishing of algal life, not what you call a bloom, constitutes part of our good life. Instead, a bloom is either an economic or ecological catastrophe or a possible tool to stop climate change. This shows how, to you, we are hazardous for seas, but saviors for the atmosphere. Even our toxins depend upon a kind of relational interaction in order to be demarcated as harmful.
From what I know, as of 2015, over 100 products of cyanobacteria are recognized, which are toxic to animals, including humans, and to plants. Even though these toxins are not often fatal to humans, many toxic effects are socially, medically, and economically significant for us, such as paralytic shellfish poisoning, diuretic shellfish poisoning, amnesic shellfish poisoning, ciguatera, and ichthyotoxins, or fish-killing toxins. These toxins have varied effects, functioning as neurotoxins, hepatotoxins, or dermatoxins. Toxins can thus represent threats when emitted from algal blooms, but also when chemically synthesized.
Yes, but by nature of their impartial and limited capacities and applications, they also can be non-reactive or beneficial for some. One of the algal neurotoxins, saxitoxin, for example, was synthesized and stockpiled by the USA military and CIA for its detrimental effects on humans. In contrast, other toxins, such as domoic acid, a particularly dangerous neurotoxin, and one implicated in the deaths of sea lions, and canic acid, have been suggested to be well suited for killing intestinal parasites within human digestive tracts. A survey from 2018 reveals 34 toxin groups, 6 of which harm humans, 3 of which irritate human skin and respiratory function, 4 of which do not cause harm to humans and aquatic organisms, 7 of which kill fish, and 14 of which effects are unknown. Our toxins represent a wide range of possibility. The majority of toxins found most recently are those which kill fish but have not been proven to harm people. Toxins can be stable and do not necessarily disappear immediately after a bloom. Many cannot be boiled out of the water. And no research has produced definitive longitudinal studies on the effects of ingesting small amounts of toxins emitted from algae. As you can see, although the dose and the timing help to make the poison, so do the users and the environments.
Well, doesn't all this make you even more potentially hazardous in a way? You pointed out that ecological concerns may be one way to define you as harmful. The very presence of algal blooms implies a sign of an unhealthy, dangerous sea. Hence, an outcome of the institutionalization of harmful algae research seeks to make the seas less hospitable to you. In other words, we label you as harmful and therefore wish to contain your flourishing in the seas either by attempting to maintain it as more oligotrophic than eutrophic or by other means. Is this ecologic vision a threat to you?
Your guess is as good as ours, for it would be a mistake to assume that our increases in time and space is good for us. We don't know the long-term effects this will have on our abilities to thrive. More concretely, as one species of algae, what's good for us is not necessarily good for another. We are as different from each other as you are from bats or lizards. That said, it seems like algae such as us can only contribute to the human ecological imagination through our presence. In your visions of outer space, we usually contribute positively by sustaining you or by making atmospheres breathable on other planets. But unfortunately, on Earth, we tend to be maligned. Because a sea replete with algae almost always is dystopic, we mourn that your ecological vision of a healthy sea accommodates some algae but not others. As floating slime, cyanobacteria can affect whitecaps, waves, turbidity levels, and ripples in the sea. In the Gulf of Finland, algal blooms have used gels and fibers to increase net growth and protect each other from grazers. We transform our environment just like you do. We can shade the sea and block sunlight from reaching plants and other organisms, and as our dead bodies decay in the sea's depths, all the available dissolved oxygen in the water gets used up. In the very act of being, we create our own ecological vision, which is perhaps the very point and reason for living. Since your industrial activity lends itself to an environment in which we thrive, our ecological vision is one that is supported by human societies and infrastructures. Thus, we also represent a cutting reminder of your species' inconsistencies in how you live and define your own well-being.
It sounds very much like you'd like to be placed on equal footing with humans. But why should we do that? It's very clear that the production of toxins by harmful algal blooms has environmental impacts not just on humans and human societies, but on a whole network of creatures and habitats. Algal blooms are potentially hazardous to different marine environments as well as a variety of living organisms. Admittedly, many effects of algal blooms, if not all, could be argued to affect humans at least indirectly, but they don't exclusively affect them.
That's a key point. We don't do these things to you or to any other creature per se. We just create the conditions for harm. But as if in harmonious duet, your response can be as ruthless as our way of life. In the case of shellfish, they function for scientists as indicator or sentinel species, animals sacrificed to safeguard human lives. As of the year 2000, bioassays were still deemed a necessary part of modern research into cause and effect in toxicology. Thus, testing for algal toxins results in the killing of innumerable mussels and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of mice around the world in order to see if the extract potentially harbors a poison. In addition, for every toxin or toxic species that is found, there seems to be another that slips away, such as incidents in France in the early 1990s and the USA in the late 1990s. The next toxic algae around the corner does not necessarily fit a predictable linear and static model, but rather a dynamic temporal evolutionary dimension. As the editors of the first issue of Harmful Algae News articulate, the virulence of harmful algal blooms is likely to be exalted as man's demands on coastal zones intensify, and species which at present are harmless may in the future cause problems. Harmful algal blooms inhabit a present stretching into the future, where the link between humans and algae shape one another, possibly pushing one or the other species to become harmful to each other, as well as other innocent bystanders. In each and every respect, your experts act as jury and executioner. It's not that humans ought to treat us necessarily as equals, due to the fact that we vie with each other over certain spaces and times and species in the seas. Maybe you should not. However, it's clear that since humans and algae both make environments according to their own lives, one ought not be surprised to see that how we are made harmful and to whom allows you to more adequately wrest control over what kind of ecological vision takes precedence for the future. You impose your vision upon us.
That sounds like we won't come to any kind of mutual agreement about what to do next. As mobile, dynamic beings with ebbs and flows throughout seasons, life cycles, and environmental conditions, your hazardous potential certainly is different than what we are dealing with in terms of nuclear waste, arsenic dumps, and other long-term toxic environments. Could you help us understand this temporality a little better? Your seasonal longevity and brevity combined makes algal blooms seem like both forms of slow violence and catastrophe.
That's the thing. As a species, we inhabit a bevy of temporalities. There's no single temporality to describe. The environment is never static to us since we are driven by it. And we develop different strategies to deal with that. Some of us overwinter in the water column, while others overwinter on the seafloor. Hence, the times you impose upon us seem to be a strategy for humans to develop a wall around us, to keep us confined to certain parts of the ocean away from your interests. We don't really care about the sea in the same ways you do. Not that we are impassionate beings, but we just don't understand why humans wish to meddle in oceanic politics of the body when their ill-suited human forms can barely get below its surface. In comparison to the geologic, we are short-term individuals like humans. We live full lives and the species continues. But because the future is unknown, we prepare for our survival. Thus, if the water feels good and there's food, we're going to take advantage. That's the funny thing about humans. You talk about sustainability, generational justice, ecological stability, what have you, but you really lack the imagination for anything beyond the present, let alone the necessary biological spatio-temporal scale. Time is probably the biggest fiction that humans have invented. Certainly, the lifespan of a single person generally lasts much longer than ours, but your potential for adapting to a generational, let alone species-centric outlook seems laughable. Part of the reason why there are so many algal blooms these days is not merely due to humans increasing their ecologic and geologic powers in the so-called Anthropocene epoch. Humans really appear to have outstripped their own mental, physical, even technological capacities for handling the spatio-temporal regime they now occupy. Concepts like the Anthropocene and technosphere actually posit the opposite of what you'd like to believe. That is, environment and technology control you, even if you are sitting at the board turning the dials. In other words, you have exceeded your biological and social capacity to handle your innovations and technological prowess. You're a very ingenious species, but still too dumb to recognize that what makes you special will make many humans, other animals, plants, and habitats suffer tremendously.
That sounds provocative to me, because I hear that as an argument against many important trends in humanities-based research, such as concerns related to deep time, posthumanism, and the more than human. This interview is a case in point. Forgive me for being rude and asking you to say what might seem obvious, but why ought people care about what you think? Can people reconcile their perspectives to accommodate yours, a being which, in its struggles, impedes and damages certain human-driven industries and visions of nature? In short, why should humans care about algae if they're going to harm us?
To worry that we are harmful ought to incite you to think about the harms that humans permit and incur upon us and other beings. In other words, the point in all this is to provide a space for reflection for you, not for us. We do what we do. By making this the focal point of your story as an entity with expertise, whatever that may be, you shift the narrative. The story is no longer entirely about what you do to us or how we cause you problems. We suddenly have breathing room to acknowledge that our harmfulness results from the immense amount of labor you put into your sensorial interpretation of our seasonal routines, as well as your categorization of algae in space and time. For us, we would as readily spur you on to continue reshaping the seas for our benefit. The dividing wedge between us is that our actions merge with yours, exposing the incompatibility of what you desire from watery environments with what you do to them. The harms we present to you rely upon harms you enact. As with domesticated animals and pesticide-resistant superbugs, our connections and clashes in the seas will determine whether we become foe or friend. For now, we see no end to your surface and submarine interests. Can we stop you? No, but maybe other humans can act on our behalf. Maybe you might explode your own narrow frames. We know that you can't even take care of your own kind, so why us? Why now? You may be able to leverage some algae for your benefit, and maybe ours as well, but many of us may not transition to cultivation. For that reason alone, we must continue on as best suits us.
I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I also want to give you the last word by posing one last question. It seems like my attempt at accommodating your perspectives has put us in some form of stalemate. What is it that researchers and others pondering over algae-related ecological problems can do at this point?
We suppose that we want you to see that you do not have to align with or against us, that our relationship to each other may be governed outside the confines of harm. We think you're interviewing us as one step in this direction. It makes a gesture that seeks to think with us also as rightful progeny of the seas and oceans. It uses artistic practice as a way to address the problems you have with us. Perhaps through respectful play and continued reflections upon why we upset you so, you might find ways to reconcile your lives to ours instead of the other way around.
Thank you so much, Justy. Really. Now I'm just checking if things are kind of working around here. Caroline, I would like to invite you here. I mean, I will of course disappear from here pretty soon, meaning that I will be just sitting as your kind of tech person, but
yeah, and then I can sit maybe on.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. So, I mean, I would just let myself to introduce Caroline, who is a curator and prospective PhD student in gender studies at Linköping University, and her curatorial work explores interdisciplinary processes and collaborations across the fields of contemporary art, science fiction, ecology, technology, and feminism. As curator at Bonniers Konsthall, in Stockholm, she has been working with artists from the globe over. Recent exhibitions including cosmological arrows, journeys through inner and outer space, and new materialism. So very warm welcome, Caroline, and let us just do the technical stuff, of course. And it's set up here, so let's see. Yes, and of course we are on the first slide, and this, and I do hope that everyone can see this, right, and also hear us. Okay, so just arrows. And
yeah, thank you so much. So thank you so much, Marietta. And from this seaside of Ornö, I will take you on a brief curatorial journey where a series of artworks will tell stories of aquatic and terrestrial spaces. In a movement between land and water, across human and more than human worlds, these artistic imaginaries will guide us through past and future landscapes. But first, if you like, settle in and start with a deep breath. Following Rachel Carson, it was here at the edge of the sea that the drama of life played its first scene on Earth. The underwater forest of blue-green algae emerged from its dark tracings, transforming Earth into a breathable planet. Today, situated here at the shoreline of Ornö, algae still provide the blue planet with most of its oxygen, so we can continue to breathe a little while longer. I wonder, have you sometimes dreamt of being able to breathe underwater? I mean, without technological devices like a diving suit or a snorkel? Very much like the sharers of Shora, depicted in the feminist science fiction novel A Door into Ocean by writer and biologist Jon Slonczewski. Shora, the ocean moon, is a watery world, and the sharers who live there are a nation of bold women who share. That is, they have a spiritual and linguistic union with each other and all other beings. Treating all equally, they practice non-violence and embrace non-hierarchical perspectives at the edge of the sea, because we are what you see. We share all things. Boldness accentuated her long oval face. Or if I swim in the sea, does the sea swim in me? Now, I bring with me the world building of Slonczewski and the sharing from Shora in the carrier bag of another world builder, science fiction writer Ursula Le Guin, to see how we humans, from the perspective of contemporary art, can learn a practice of care, curiosity, and non-violence when thinking with low-trophic creatures. As a way to connect with the category of visual art and its potential to formulate oceanic and low-trophic imaginaries, I turn to Donna Haraway's five-parted SF figure. According to Haraway, SF is not mainly a genre of literature or film, but a method of tracing that is both practice and process. Here, in dialogue with Haraway, the SF model tracing is located on Earth and not in space, more specifically at the seaside in the waters with macroalgae, mussels, and all their kin. I will briefly speak about three pieces where artists engage with the low-trophic as concept, method, and material, where the infield research and situated practices gets articulated through installation, performance, film, and of course, site-specific work. Ingela Irman, she imagines how it is to actually be an algae. The duo cooking sections is working with a low-trophic as nutritious food and building material. In a film installation, Tull Johannesen and Marilyn Diekman gives visual legacy to algae and to brackish waters. These artists share a bodily experience of low-trophic life that goes beyond the single-sided way of seeing the sea at a vertical eye level. Instead, they are challenging these stereotypes of the sea that from an art historical perspective has been amplified by an romanticized and anthropocentric view on nature with, for example, these paintings by Markus Larsson and William Turner, depicting storms, shipwrecks, and battles at the surface of the water, and not considering all the rich and magnificent life beneath. I recently read a great article by Elizabeth Delore and Jana Flores about the sea in Caribbean art, where they write that the element of water allows for a kind of merger with non-human others that is comforting rather than terrifying, and I very much do agree on this. So now let's start with Ingela Irman and the green algae Ulva intestinalis, also known as gutweed or grass kelp. It's a softly lumpy and turbulent green algae that is common in small bodies of water, so-called rock pools by the sea. And this algae is also very good and nutritious to eat. So with the power of imagination, Ingela Irman weaved together personal experiences of being a human in a human's body with getting to know other life forms, such as seaweed, but also giant mussels or otters. Making in-field research at the seaside of the Baltic Sea, Ingela Irman embodies a situated natural practice, sensing the long rhythms of earth and sea, reminiscent of how Rachel Carson in The Edge of the Sea is writing. She writes, like the sea itself, the shore fascinates us who return to it, the place of our dim ancestral beginnings. In the recurrent rhythms of tide and surf, and in the varied life of tide lines, there is the obvious attraction of movement and change and beauty. There is also, I am convinced, a deeper fascination born of inner meaning and significance, which I think is very related to Ingela Irman's work. In her work, A Great Seaweed Day, that was first presented at the exhibition Weather Report Forecasting Future at the Nordic Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2019, she departs in this work from her stomach that she sees as a both sore and tender point where flows of energy converge and also emotions. Irman says, when I lay my hand on my belly, I can feel it rise and fall as I breathe. But still, the tummy lives a life of its own. It remains an ungraspable mystery. Very much like Rachel Carson, who remarked that the edge of the sea is a strange and beautiful place. Inside Irman's stomach, and for that matter in the stomachs of all humans, there are intestines linking the human body to bodies of water where the Ulva intestinalis grows. This gutweed accompanies Ingela Irman from the seaside to her studio, and here she starts this craft and translation process where the algae, with the help of a whole range of simple and foul materials, will go from micro to macro, from water to land, and become wearable sculptures, like large, more than human beings that in a performative process merge with the artist's body. Eventually, these sculptures are a bit too big to be carried around, and they make the artist's body disappear behind the network of large green tentacles. In a conversation I had with Ingela Irman recently, she explains that when dressed in the Gutweed costume, she becomes something else. And we can see she's on this slippery path that can give access to an embodied knowledge towards queer and watery becomings. So here I wanted to bring forward 3 artistic visualizations of the brown algae called a phyllum, often also called sea lace or mermaid's fishing line. It grows along the Swedish coast, but these visualizations, they are from British waters. First, we see a newspaper that is a work by Ingela Irman, and it's called Seavidsbladet. Here, Irman connects the word seaweed to the place Seved in Malmö, where the artist lived and worked at the time. And this newspaper, it was distributed to the local neighborhood, but also in conjunction with her exhibition in Venice. The algae on the front page of Seavidsbladet connects Irman's body with the bodies of 2 female pioneers. First of all, Margaret Getty, who in the 19th century recovered in Hastings after 7 tiring pregnancies. Through spending time at the seaside, Getty started a lifelong journey, getting to know all the fascinating life inhabiting the place. And the algae she collected and dried was compiled in albums called the British Seaweeds. And here in the middle, you can see Getty's original portrait of the Cordaphyllum, a visualization that Irman brought with her to Seavidsbladet. And Margaret Getty, she often ended her diary notes with a great seaweed day in capital letters, which also gave name to Irman's work that I previously discussed. So on the other side, you see a visualization made by Anna Atkins, also on the Cordaphyllum, and this is from around 1853. She was a pioneer in photography and worked with cyanotopy, one of the earliest photographic techniques. And this is a cameraless photography that gets its color from a chemical process involving iron ions. And by placing wet algae collected during long beach walks directly on light-sensitive paper, Atkins created imprints of the algae against a blue background. And blue is also the characteristic color of the cyanotopy, often also called blueprint, that in a visual sense symbolically also returns the Cordaphyllum to its watery belonging. So through this mode of method of tracing, Ingela Irman's algal immersions and bodily experiences make me think about Astrid Janimani's, who has argued that water extends embodiment in time, body to body to body. Water in this sense is facilitative and directed towards the becoming of other bodies. And this work, A Great Seaweed Day, Laminaria Digitalis, is also part of her Ingela Irman's work. So first, you see the sculptural installation by Ingela Irman, and then an image of the algae from the amazing Tångbloggen, which I think we will hear more about tomorrow from Lena Kautsky. And here we have the kräker, or Fucillaria lubricalis, first of all in Ingela Irman's sculptural large-scale installation, and then the algae in its original setting. But now, let's turn our gaze to the Scottish waters, where actually both Irman and Getty have spent time, and think together with the special practitioners cooking sections at the Isle of Skye. This duo consists of Alon Schwabe and Dana Fernandez-Pascual, who in their interdisciplinary work bridge visual art, ecology, architecture, and geopolitics. Through in-field research, they make site-specific interventions at the seaside, posing questions of how humans can eat, be, and live in relation to ongoing climate alterations. Thinking with the low-trophic zone, cooking sections have since 2015 been running a body of work called Climavo on tidal zones, where they investigate how to adapt our food diet and food infrastructure to new human-made seasons. Here, they are proposing Climavo as a form of eating following climatic transformations. Because as we know, science has already exhibited how land, soils, and waters are hardly pressed by agriculture. And with the rising temperatures, land will be increasingly hard to farm. So at the seaside of the Isle of Skye, cooking sections have established a site-specific installation that each day at high tide works as an underwater oyster table to activate filter feeders in the polluted shores of the island. At low tide, the structure merges above the sea and functions as a dining table for humans with tastings of low-trophic ingredients that clean the water by breathing, seaweeds like kelp and dulse, bivalves like oysters and mussels. The aim is very much to gather cross-disciplinary knowledge and challenge the ways in which open net salmon farms are clearing the seabed, creating dead zones at the Scottish coast and beyond, and not the least to visualize how salmon farming constitutes a rather cruel method of growing food where fish in the cages suffer from various diseases, sea lice, and more. Situated at Skye, cooking sections have created a recipe book together with restaurant chefs, food producers, apprentices from local schools that showcase climate-friendly dishes such as seaweed sourdough, gutweed salad, and crispy dulse tofu, where they are working with intertidal ingredients that respond to the new ecological challenges of the Scottish waters. Through their research-based practice, cooking sections are working with concrete hands-on methods that works for transformation in society, with history, the contemporary, and the future is very much part of the same question, something that makes me think about what Karen Barrett described as the ethical entanglement of past, present, future. So as situated knowledges, to speak with Donna Haraway, cooking sections bring forward new cultural imaginaries based on alternative aquacultures, and in this way contribute to society's environmental transition into climate and species-aware practices. This is an image from a performance lecture that cooking sections made at Bonniers Konsthall in 2019. And from Bonniers Konsthall, we've been engaged in a long-term project with the cooking sections that will culminate in a large-scale exhibition opening in August 2022. Cooking sections just opened this Tuesday, the Turner Prize exhibition at the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum in Coventry, since they are one of the Turner Prize nominees this year. And for this very exhibition, they have collaborated with 21 museum restaurants across the UK that have removed farmed salmon from their menus and instead introduced climavore dishes instead. And hopefully we will also bring this to Sweden. I recently read an interview with the artists Marjolin Dikman and Toril Johannesen that started with a quote from Rachel Carson's The Sea Around Us. It goes like this: "The ocean is the beginning of all life. In time, some creatures learn to live on land, and a few, like the whale and the seal, find their way back to the sea. Eventually, the human too found the way back to the sea, not to return to it physically, but rather to re-enter it mentally and imaginatively." With this quote, Carson brings forward the importance of the imaginary, even though I would argue that contemporary artists today do return to the sea physically, like Ingela Irman in A Grey Seaweed Day. This work is part of The Inner Ocean, a series of works that is taking its starting point in the fact that the artist loves to swim and to be embodied in water. And of course, cooking section Climavore, that is an installation that is physically located and placed in water at the edge of the sea. Drawing from Karen Barrett again, I do insist on engaging from the within rather than reflecting on the world from the outside. The overlapping practices of physically being in water at the seaside and the objectives of living ecological imaginations goes again in the film installation Reclaiming Vision by Marjolin Dikman and Toril Johannesen. As in the work of Ingela Irman, Dikman and Johannesen look at what is going on beneath the surface, starting with a wish to be lifting up the water, visuals on a micro scale, and bring a narrative on a macro scale. Situated in the brackish waters of Akerselva in central Oslo, they bring forward the brackish as a muddy metaphor, very much like Irman bring forward the slippery path as a metaphor for the algae. A kind of queer space, both salt and sweet, and I think a zone of transformation. In this work, Reclaiming Vision, they work with creating a closer relationship to microorganisms that are captured through a light microscope. The film features algae sampled at the seaside of Oslo, but also algae cultivated at the Oslo University. In this way, the artists are revealing various processes that are hidden to the naked human eye. In fact, they wanted to see whether it was possible to feel empathy or closer to something that for most humans are normally a bit out of reach both visually and emotionally. The artists are reclaiming vision through the film, creating visual legacy and making clear that we all kind of come from algae. At the same time, the film reconfigures the ocean as a dissolving space of union between human and non-human worlds. As a curator, thinking through these artworks, I have now tried to bring forward a feeling of embodiment and immersion between human and algal bodies. Freely guided by Donna Haraway's SF mode of tracing, I sense the aesthetic, scientific, social, and imaginary dimensions of the shoreline, but also ways of sharing that unlock the nature-culture divide, also within larger audiences, because these situations bring the artist, the artwork, and the viewer into a relation. After all, these artworks are visual multispecies assemblages that show an intimacy with the sea. And from this specific position, we may learn new ways of appreciating and caring for the seaside, and I think also new ways for how to reimagine the world. I will finish this presentation with a quote from Adoring the Ocean. So feel free to take a last deep breath and kind of imagine your own immersion with the seaside. I have the seaside of Ornö here to my right. You are sitting in the seaweed of Shora, and you're watching the moon and its arcs of reflection in the water, and together we are singing a song and sharing a song with the sea. Door of ocean, heart of sky, lips that pressed together lie. Flute of hornshell, lift in hand, sing for those who dwell on land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And I would like to ask you to, not run away, but stay. I would also like to ask Jessie to, to sort of come here.
Sure.
Yes, my dears. Right. So I think that then we have. Let me just see what we see on the screen, and let me play around with the view. I will also pin here Maria and Andy and where are you? Okay, and where are we? No, where is the other camera? I'm sorry. I'm just struggling here with obviously technology, as you see. Not very successfully with this, but let's see. Okay, right. So I will be kind of outside of the screen, maybe, and maybe not. Maybe like this, and then you can see this, and you can see the. Yes, I should move to the. I see the messages here from from the audience. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, so maybe I should take it there, but yes, that's fine.
Please take it.
Or I will take it. Sorry about this. Lots of technical things here, but. I think that we have quite a bunch in the in the electronic room and quite a bunch in this room. We'll kind of run a little bit over time, but those of you who are who are in a digital room, please, if you have any questions or comments or would like to join the discussion, please just raise your hand and or actually type your questions. Maybe also participants that are, the speakers, the wonderful speakers of today. So if you have questions to each other, that's of course also very warm welcome, and the audience here. So I'll try to do my best, so to speak, as like taking care of time and taking care of all the hands and people eager to join in. Yes. So is there anyone who would like to start, pose a question? I see here one person in the room. Cecilia, would you like to maybe kind of? I'm not sure if, and I see Andy as well. But let's go first.
Yeah. Should I go over there?
Can you hear her?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. This is
Can't
so
see
funny.
you though.
No.
We'll do this, weird.
Sit next to. It's after the restrictions here in Sweden, so take the opportunity to sit next to Caroline. I have this question to you actually first. Thank you so much for your presentation. Wonderful. And I would like to ask you a little bit about a very general question, but it speaks to kind of the whole what we are doing here, and it's about the very role, because you've been working with art and curating for years. So what is actually the role of art and fiction and imagination when it comes to transforming our ecological consciousness in society?
I think it's very much about storytelling, creating good stories that can appeal to also larger audiences. And at least for me, art has a lot to do with emotions. You can really feel something, and it's in this very much embodied experiences of being like within rather than looking from the outside. And I believe that this meeting and being within really has got the potential also to transform people's imaginary visions of what is possible to do, basically. So we can turn towards more climate and species-aware practices.
Great. Then I will jump to Andy.
Thanks. Yeah, I was interested by Caroline's the image that you showed, the Turner painting and the storm, and I think you were referring to it as like a sort of anthropomorphic experience or something. So, because for us, being on the boat, and particularly this year when we have faced very, very strong storms, and really, if you like, confronting this, almost, sort of survival situations at sea, it does change your perspective on the world and the environment and your place in that. And I was wondering what you were, you seem to be almost dismissing that to some extent, or so I would like to know more about it. Obviously, I understand the idea of this sort of marginal areas and being in those spaces, but maybe you could open up a bit more on this area.
You mean without not being in the ocean and being at the edge of the sea, you mean?
Yeah, well, and because you particularly were using this image of the shipwreck, and I was sort of, interested by that.
You mean the historical picture? Yes. I mean, from an art historical point of view, there have been so many of these paintings depicting, as I said, shipwrecks and things going on the surface of the water. But what I'm trying to bring forward is rather what is under, like not the vertical line, but the horizontal line and what is going on beneath, and how we in a series of artistic practices are working with these agencies, and as a contrast to 19th century painting, for example. But of course, there are like a multitude of other perspectives to add to this, but this is just one perspective.
Yeah. Okay, because I almost got the feeling that then I'm 19th century painter in my practice with Godzilla, but I thought it was very interesting, your talk. So
Okay.
thank you.
Can I, Andy, sort of add to this? Because in my PhD, I'm particularly working from the sort of the knowledge theory of knowledge, concentrating on pragmatism, and looking at usually art. When we're dealing with the art, is very much about the sort of oculocentric viewpoint, thinking that we are gazing an object, and we are sort of using in a sort of Kantian, Immanuel Kantian way of understanding. We're sort of letting our imagination roam, and we're using literal and theoretical sort of knowledge to try to comprehend what something is about. And when I'm talking about the pragmatism and the type of the artworks, what me and Andy have been doing over the past 20 years is much more shifting to the sort of whole body experience. And this issue of being in the boat, on the mercy of the wind, storm, you have some technical instruments what you can use, like the navigator and the chart plotter, solar panels and stuff, but mainly it is about your boat and the sea, and then your somehow ability to trust yourself, your own partner, but mostly just to endure. And then you actually understand when you're in the midst of the storm, you're soaking wet. You and your partner, me and Andy, when we were sailing from Gotland to Sandhamn, we were soaking wet, and we're both about to collapse with the sleep and getting very cold. And we could have died if bad luck happened. And or the situation had continued for a bit longer. You actually also understand that you're so much at the mercy of your own abilities, of the endurance, your physical sort of, you're quite feeble there. And what I'm trying to maybe say is a whole body sensory and mental experience. It's not just about the voyeurism or looking at the picture or narrating. You stop narrating, you just and only try to survive. And this, by my mind, is something what we maybe as contemporary people, it's so easy to sort of be brought along with the, and be extremely academically removed from the actual existential battle, or the with the elements. And with the sea, it's just so huge, so enormous, and the strength is, it easily just wipes you off. And I think this is maybe also what we tend to, we're consuming so much like imagery from the media about the volcanic eruptions or climate change. We somehow tend to think it's something just to contemplate, as if that actually solved something. But the mere conscious contemplation is, by my mind, it's only the beginning of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see there is some more kind of, it's team on location generating questions. So I see question to Jessie. Thank you for a mind-blowing presentation, and you actually made us witness a conversation with algae. So what's the affordances of anthropomorphism in the way you did it with algae?
Okay. You're very kind to ask me a question. I mean, I think it very much depends. I mean, there's lots of questions about if it's ethical or if it's right, or do we have I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is a lot of people tend to question whether or not humans can even understand each other, so let alone a being like cyanobacteria. So I think what I am trying to get at here is that this writing style, I'm not going to necessarily call it anthropomorphism per se, but this writing style, I think, opens up ways for poetic inquiry into ways of imagining other kinds of practices or ways of thinking. And I think this goes with some of the earlier questions, because I think it provides space for reconsidering the kinds of values that we bring to the table when we interact with not just ourselves, but environments or other beings. And I think that that's very important, because the way that we value the seas, for instance, are very much ingrained in our daily practices, whether we know that or not.
Thank you so much, Jesse. And I see Nina's hand. Nina, please.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for fantastic, amazing presentations. I was happy that death was brought up in relation to death at the sea, because in all these amazing presentations, I somehow missed death, and I somehow missed the entanglement of life and death. And I think I would like, I mean, there's a lot of things to be said about that, but for example, I think I would like to pose a question to Jesse, because I mean, I was very taken by your end that the algae is saying your life, I mean, saying to the humans that you should reconcile your life to ours instead of the other way around. What I would somehow like you to comment on is, I mean, the way I would frame it myself would be that you should reconcile the entanglement of life and death to ours, because otherwise, and vice versa, because otherwise I think it becomes very much a question of survival. I mean, who is surviving? Is it the algae or the humans? So it becomes this kind of, I mean, it ends up in this kind of survival of the fittest discussion. And to me, I do think that the whole issue of the entanglement of life and death is so very important in this ecological situation that we are in, because what I think is really a problem is that the balances between life and death are really disrupted. And I think that algae has been living here for 150 million years on Earth, and there has been anoxic events and a lot of things, but these balances have never been threatened in the way they are now due to, I mean, human-induced work. So therefore, I really think that it's important to somehow think death into this and the entanglement of life and death. So yeah, question specifically to the way you ended, Jesse.
I'll try to respond. I'm not sure I grasp the whole question, but I suppose I would say that there's a lot of normativity about eutrophication, specifically in the Baltic Sea, that it's bad for the ecosystem, bad for society, bad for economy. And I don't necessarily think that those arguments are necessarily wrong. And I guess what I would like to say is that there's, I mean, I guess part of the project here was to kind of rethink from the perspective of something that we label as being harmful to humans, and thinking through like what they might, how they might react to this kind of intensive monitoring, intensive what's the other word? Application of algicides or what have you. So I mean, I think death is an important factor here. But I guess maybe I should just take this as more as a comment, as that's something for me to think more about, perhaps. But yeah.
I mean, I think it was an amazing discussion, but it was just that I somehow missed these issues around the entanglement of life and death, and the ways in which these are also brought out of balance. And I think that the whole issue of harmful is also about that it's, I mean, threatening the lives of humans, and the algae is then responding that, I mean, within that framework. But I would like also to hear this issue about the entanglement of life and death, and the ways in which I really think that this entanglement has become enormously unbalanced, and that's the problem. But a great presentation. So
thank you so much. I mean, Andy had to leave us, unfortunately, but I think that, you know, it's been a lot of super interesting, you know, kind of re-exchanges, and I don't want to necessarily keep everyone longer. So I think that we should probably, if, you know, not to sort of, I would say, you know, test too much your Zoom capacities, we should kind of, you know, also close this session. So thank you so much to everyone in the room, especially big thanks to Andy and Maria, to Caroline and to Jessie. So once again, please give a hand. I also do hope that we'll kind of continue those conversations, because we reconvene with the Southern Network members actually very soon. So hopefully we can, you know, just have a very, you know, very kind of laid back meeting, and with everyone else during the keynote with Professor Stacey Alaimo. So thank you so much, and see you very soon in another meeting room, actually on Zoom. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
I had a question for you, actually.